everyone and welcome. How are you enjoying January? Are you in self-isolation? Are you out and about back to normal, or are you still on holidays? Or are you, like I am, working from home with kids who are on school holidays? So earlier this week I caught up with a friend, a female friend who is younger than I am, who doesn't yet have a family of her own. She's not yet married. Actually, I shouldn't say not yet, but you know what I mean. It's not a value statement. She's not at that stage. She's in a relationship, but she's not married. She doesn't have kids. She may one day. And she asked me if she could ask me a personal question. And I was intrigued because you never know what's going to come out when people ask these things. Just 1 minute. Boys, you know how I said I was doing a Facebook about things, Facebook Live? Like I said, I have children at home, and that's the theme for today, is how to manage that. So my friend said she wanted to ask me a personal question, and I went, go ahead. And she said, well, when you have your kids at home, how many hours do you actually work? And I had to stop and think about this, because I think it's a sort of an interesting conundrum where there's so much guilt. There's so much guilt about mothers who do work because they feel guilty they're not with their kids. When they're with their kids, they feel guilty that they're not working. And I don't think there's any ever way to really get that right. And it's something we don't talk about. And I'd love to hear from you about how you manage your own family dynamics and what kind of issues you have. So I wanted to, before I go into talking about what we actually do, and I'm just going to actually see if I can move the camera around so you can see what my kids are doing. So you can see that I'm very real here. There's my mannequin and there's my kids. I've just made them some leftover spaghetti bolognese, heated up with some leftovers and some more pasta sauce. And the plan was that they would quietly have lunch while I did this Facebook Live, but it hasn't exactly gone to plan, but that's okay. So my story. Well, firstly, my mother, Lee Bird, she's a former fashion designer, and she had, quite an extensive business as I was growing up. When I was very young, she managed the juggle with kids and family, and I think back in the 70s, I was born in 1972, so you can find out my age fairly easily. It's not a secret. There weren't that many women who were combining successful careers with motherhood, and she was one of the first, I think, of that generation. Now, because she was in a partnership with someone else, but she wasn't like she was an employee, she could be a little bit more flexible. And what she used to do is spend about half of most days at home, where she had a room in the house that was her pattern room, and she'd go in there, and in those days they would make all the patterns by hand. She was really very good at making patterns, so she would have done her designs and done other stuff. But in those afternoons, she would do making the patterns. And I would often be in the pattern room. I'd often sit under the table as she was doing this. It was an old-fashioned industrial sort of table. And for those of you who might know something about the fashion industry and how it was at that stage, sort of on the edges, I remember the metal of the big table, there were almost these holes. And I used to have all these ribbons. Mum used to give me ribbons and buttons to play with. And I'd get the ribbons and I'd tie them on the side, and I'd get the buttons underneath and I would sort them. And I do all sorts of things. So that's kind of how Mum managed. She was able to do that. Of course, she also had a network of carers, of babysitters, of childminders. So I always had like stable carers, and she always had that from when I was born, and then when my younger sister, who was born about 2 years later. So she always had like quite a lot of support mechanisms in place, probably more than most mothers who are combining business and kids do these days. Now for me, when I had my kids, I took some time off, but probably not as much as most. At that time, I was with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. In my marriage, I was the main salary earner. I was the main career person. So I earned about not quite double what my ex-husband was earning, but certainly I was the main career earner. So for me to take time off to have kids was kind of a big deal. In fact, we never really had a discussion, an in-depth discussion about even discussing that I would take a lot of time off to have kids. It just was something that didn't really seem to be financially viable. And I was so into my career, I just assumed that that's always what I wanted to do. So my first child, Austin, who's now 11, he was born prematurely, 2 months early, which was a bit of a shock. And I shared some of that story recently on a Holy SH Beat T I'm Pregnant podcast. recently about some of those experiences of having a baby in the neonatal intensive care unit. It was pretty intense. But even so, I didn't take a lot of time off. I took 7 months off. I was planning to take about 8 or 9, but I had to come back to work early because I was posted overseas. And there was a lot of pressure on me too to come back to work early while I was on maternity leave. I kept being asked back to do things, which was tricky because I didn't have care in place. When I had my second son, who's now 8, Audi, I was on posting to Taiwan. And it's sort of an unwritten rule that you try not to have kids on posting. You try to, I don't know, time it. But the reality is you can't time it. You know, like I was trying to start a family for 5 years while I was back in Canberra and it didn't work. As soon as I go on posting, you know, conceive a child, have a child, naturally, who was born just before my 40th birthday. I mean, these things happen. Like, it was a miracle. I didn't expect it, and very happy to have a second child. And I had 4 months off. So I had about a month of personal leave and then 3 months of maternity leave, which was the maximum that was allowed. Now, I had a bit more support when I was there because I had a carer for the Philippines. I also had a confinement nurse for the first month, and I had my ex-husband, although things were a bit rocky at that stage, but I had him too. I was still, after the first month, doing a lot of work. So I was frequently back attending events, after hours, or in for meetings. So while I was supposed to be on leave, I wasn't really, but I still had that time off. But it wasn't like, you know, a year or 2 years or 3 years. And I didn't go back part-time. I went back full-time. And when I was suddenly single, I was also managing 2 kids full-time, including pickups and drop-offs. And look, that was fine. And, you know, I know there's a lot of Wonder Women, super women out there who do that. I was kind of quite strong and bolshy about doing this, that this is what I felt was really quite important. I was probably burning myself out a little bit, especially too when I was living in a place that wasn't the form of family home, that wasn't close to work. And then 4 years ago I moved so that I was closer to work and that the kids were closer to school. And then I also rearranged my life a lot more too, including just over a year ago leaving my work. So I guess that's just a bit of background to say that I haven't always been the sort of parent who's put their kids first. Like, often it was the work who was first. And I'm proud of the fact that I could financially support my kids. And, you know, this was something that I felt the time was important to me. So I'm coming at this kind of flexibility angle, not from someone who's always done this. This is actually quite new to me. But when I did decide to, you know, change, jump ships, shall you say, to become my own boss, there were a number of things that were driving that decision. You know, one was, you know, a toxic environment at my work. The second one was the desire to have more of my own voice. And the third was actually more in terms of flexibility with my family life. I'd remarried at this stage. Hubby knew he was going to be on a big project that would involve a lot of travel. He was meant to have been in Spain for most of last year. He ended up having one trip and then another trip to Western Australia, where he was there for nearly 3 months. He's off to Sydney next week. So I knew he would be away a lot. And while I was single parenting before I met him, you know, when you're in a relationship, it is actually a lot more difficult. There's a lot more stuff. You know, you speak to each other on the phone a lot more every day. There's a lot more of admin and other things that happen when you're in a relationship. So in a way, when it's just a different dynamic. And my life had changed too. And I wasn't sure how I'd manage all of that. And also too, my children were starting to get a bit frazzled, and I think they were responding to the stress I was under in my job in particular. My oldest, this time last year, had a mental health plan for anxiety, as I did. And, you know, there was just a lot of things on that were just a little bit harder to manage. And then, of course, you know, the bushfires came and we've had COVID and so forth. And I guess I've had my kids at home a lot during the past year, not just in the holidays. It's been kind of a stable. And we sort of developed a few rules and a few processes in terms of how to deal with that. And I guess having had a mum who had been working and have a business, I never had an expectation that, you know, I was going to be the nurturing mother who was going to be picking after them and doing stuff. Like, one of the great things that I had was because I had such a strong, positive female business role model that I never grew up thinking that as a woman there were things that I couldn't do. like, it's fascinating when I talk to female clients who had a mother who was a stay-at-home mum who didn't have a lot of money for herself and didn't think she could do a lot, didn't have a lot of means, wasn't comfortable with money. They've inherited that mindset. Like, that was not my story. Like, my mother was a kick-ass property investor. She's quite a dynamic woman when it comes to money and finances. Like everyone, she's not perfect, and there were things that she's not as confident with, like driving, oddly, but certainly kick-ass in terms of business. So, you know, I inherited that mindset and that understanding that having that strong, powerful force was such a great role model for me. On the flip side, there was very much imperfect action. You know, like, I would usually make my own school lunches. My hair was perhaps a little bit more disheveled going to school than other kids. Sometimes she'd forget to fill out forms. I remember once there was a performance. I think I'd forgotten to give her the form, and she'd forgotten to fill it out. So I had to become a lot more independent growing up than I guess a lot of kids, particularly today, are, because I had to do a lot more things myself. But coming into my own parenting, I'm a lot more aware now that it's okay to be an imperfect parent. Like, the key things is about love, about supporting your kids, listening to your kids, being an active listener, being there for them, not being the perfect parent. Like, sometimes when you've got so many balls in the air, some are going to fall, and like, that's okay. Like, you know, life will go on and that will be fine. So, you know, I guess I very much take that through. So in terms of like how we actually, you know, manage our day-to-day, which is, I guess, where this kind of started from, you know, it is fairly fluid. Like I said, we have a couple of rules. At the moment, during these school holidays, we have a rule that each of my sons has to spend half an hour with me a day doing something. Now, they're very specific tasks, and there's a reason for this. And that is because I looked at sending them on a 3-day camp to learn coding. The eldest one says he wants to be a computer programmer, so I was going to send him on a camp to learn coding. The youngest has his own YouTube channel. He is really into that. He's currently got 26 subscribers, or subs as he says. He's envious of my 77, and we've got a race on, the both of us, to get to 1,000, just saying. So if you want to help me beat him, I'm at the Joyful Frugalista, and if you want to help him, I'll put a link later. So he's got a Minecraft YouTube gaming channel, and so both of them really have these skills and interests. So I was like, put them on this code camp. One can do coding, one can do YouTube. We're set. But neither of them wanted to go, and I was so surprised. And they're like, why? And they're like, oh, Mum, well, we can do this anyway. And I'm like, what do you mean you can do this anyway? And they're like, oh, well, it's sort of too easy for us, and we don't feel it'll excel us enough, and we're not happy to do this. So I said, okay, well, instead, because I know I'm trying to learn in both of these areas myself, let's sit down for half an hour each. So for half an hour every day, I sit down with my eldest son, who's 11, and we spend time one-on-one doing some computing work. So I'm updating the Joyful Frugalista, I'm doing some work on the Joyful Fashionista. At this stage it's mainly integration work, but earlier it had been some website building work, and so I'm giving him some basic web developing tools. Now, it's not as exciting as he thought it was. He thought it was all going to be like shoot 'em up quick style stuff that he likes to watch and play with, but I'm giving him some building blocks so that, you know, if he wants to do a side hustle one day building websites, he has some basic tools that are going to enable him to do that. So, and he likes spending time with me. He does find it a bit boring, but he does like spending time with me. Now, the youngest, who wants to be my YouTube star, he's the one that we spend half an hour every day learning about YouTube. So we watch videos on how to create good content on YouTube. We do some practical things. For instance, he showed me how to create and upload a thumbnail, and he's also shown me how to create end screens, and he's given me some really good advice on my own channel. So it's not just me teaching him, we are learning together on this journey. And so we just have a talk about it. We have a talk about plans, we have a talk about how to schedule things. He showed me how to premiere YouTube the other week. I know he's 8, right? It's kind of crazy. And I've been showing him a few things on Canva. So that's what we do. And so it's actually useful for me in terms of how I struggle my day, because this kind of developmental work is stuff that often gets put to the back burner in terms of what I'm doing. I had a strategic objection this year to have a big bigger presence on YouTube, and having that commitment for half an hour every day that they're with me, you know, really does help. And same with my eldest, that does help too. And I think also too, it's a blend, you know, during the day while we're home most of the day. Like sometimes I'll take them out. When they were little, it was a very different situation. Like my kids are now primary school age. They're now 8 and they're 11. So they are quite independent most of the day. They can play computer games most of the day. We do try and get them out at least once a day, but they can be fairly independent while I'm working. When they were young, that's a different story. If you've got like a toddler at home and you're trying to do work, it is really difficult. Some people are amazing at it. I don't know how they manage it, but some people are amazing in terms of managing to keep little people distracted while they can go to work, whether it's in the playpen or whether it's TV or whether it's other things. Some people are just genius, or giving them toys. Some people are just genius at making these sort of things work. I realised very early on that having 2 very active boys, there was no way that I was going to be really efficient and effective at work while I had young kids. So my strategy when my kids were very young was when it was school holidays, and if I had work to do, and in those days I was a public servant, so I usually had taken leave, but often, you know, even if you are on holidays, there's still stuff to do. Like I was in a role where I wasn't really backfilled when I was away, so, you know, some things really just did have to be done when you're away, because otherwise they just wouldn't get done at all and they couldn't wait for that period of time. So my strategy was that in the morning I would take them somewhere, whether it was a park or whether to the National Museum of Australia, or for another play date or for an outing somewhere, and let them run. Let them be active, let them use up a bit of energy. And by this stage then I would be exhausted too. But we've been out, we've done something, then they came back, we had lunch, they'd have a rest. I might even need a rest too, who knows. But I try and do a bit of work when we were resting. When they were resting. And then in the afternoon, then I was quite okay if they wanted to, you know, play on their devices. At that stage they didn't have full computers, or watch TV or do other stuff, because we'd been out in the morning, we'd done something substantive, and then so the afternoon was more chill time, and that gave me some time to do my own stuff. So that's how I managed it when they were younger. Now that they're older, and noting too, I have a co-parenting arrangement with my ex, so they're not with me all the time, and so the times they're not with me, I do more work. The time they are with me, I'm a little bit more flexible. Like for instance, yesterday they came back, I hadn't seen them for about a week. I know my eldest son is really interested in making ice cream. He's been watching YouTube videos about how to cook. The youngest wants to be the YouTube star. The oldest is more quiet, but he's more considered, but it turns out he's quite a foodie. It's a bit of a surprise to me, because he's also the fussy eater, but then I used to be a fussy eater too, and I ended up being a foodie, so maybe he's taken after me. But he's been watching all these YouTubes about how to make ice cream. So we stopped for a bit and I said, okay, we're going to make ice cream, because I can. Like, who cares if I stop for half an hour in the middle of a working day to make ice cream? Because my working day is not 9 to 5. It can be anything from 7 till like 9:30, 10. In fact, it often is. Like often, yesterday morning I was up early. I had 2 sets of networking meetings, one at 7 and one at 10. I did that. I also had a meeting with a conveyancer at 8:30, and I had a money chat, and I was working on an article. So, and then late at night I was doing some website development work right up to about 10:30. So if I pause for half an hour in the afternoon to make ice cream with my son, like, you know, why not? I can do that. Because I have that flexibility, I'm able to do that. So I don't know if that answers some of the questions, but, you know, how many hours do I spend working versus looking after my kids on school holidays? You know, it depends. It depends on what's happening. It depends on so many factors. But I guess I'm learning to be kinder to myself. I'm learning not to feel guilty when I choose to work rather than spending time with my kids. Learning not to feel guilty when I spend time with my kids versus working. Like, it is kind of, I won't say balance, because I don't think it really is. But, you know, sometimes the fact that you have a goal and it's passionate for you and you're working towards it is also a really good lesson for your kids. My kids are quite interested, you know, in some of my writing and some of my other work, and I think the fact that they are interested in things in the digital space largely reflects the fact that I'm also interested in this. So they're kind of monitoring what I'm interested in and they're following that. So I think those things are really quite important. And I don't force them in terms of their interests or their life to do certain things and do certain ways. I should add too, I just remembered one other thing, which was during COVID and during the long lockdown, I had them for about 6 weeks in the middle of the year. We had another rule in the first few weeks of that before the school started to give work, when it was up to parents to delegate work. The rule was that they couldn't get on their devices before midday and that they had to do some other work. And that included reading for at least half an hour. And then I would usually set them at least one piece of homework that they had to do. But they had to do that at least. And then they had to entertain themselves until midday. And let me just say that once the clock hit 12, they were on their devices so fast, it was ridiculous, but they still did that. And then at 4 o'clock, Grandpa would call, Grandpa from Melbourne, and they would do some reading with Grandpa. So that's kind of how they worked through that day. So we're not doing that at the moment. I've been a bit more relaxed during these school holidays. They don't have that requirement. They can be on their devices. They can be on their computers rather, because they've got proper computers now. And then they're super excited because yesterday I rang our provider and I increased the internet speed dramatically from 12 megabytes per second to 100 megabytes per second. So they've already seen a huge increase in their online speeds and they are super excited. But the big rule during these school holidays is that they have to spend half an hour a day with me developing some of their skill sets in different ways. So I'm preparing them for their new economy. But the choice of these very much reflects what they tell me that their interest is. Okay, enough from me. Thank you so much once again. Do make sure to check out the Joyful Business Club Facebook group. Should be on there already a Flaunt It Friday, so please stop by and talk about what you are celebrating this week. Tomorrow there'll be a Saturday sharing, and I do want to announce that in mid-February I will have my first private mastermind for the Joyful Business Club. So it'll be $380 for 12 weeks. I'm just finalising the details. It'll be a very small select group of high-powered, or at least high-vibe, high-thinking women looking to do some amazing things. So if you think you are one of those and you want to connect with someone who's similar, please do. I have been prototyping this by doing a small group for the last couple of months, and the changes have been really quite remarkable. I'm so happy to be able to support some amazing women doing some amazing things. Thank you very much.